When Ilara Moretti stood bleeding at her husband's gates, pregnant, desperate, and already dying inside, she didn't know the woman who'd stolen her place was watching from the window above. The Mafia boss who once burned cities for her wouldn't even unlock the door. But the men hunting her in the storm? They had no trouble finding her. Some betrayals come from enemies. The worst ones come from the man who vowed to protect you. If you want to see how far love can fall before it destroys everything, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches. Dutton. The storm had teeth. Ilara felt them the moment she stepped out of the cab, rain slashing sideways across the circular driveway like something alive and angry. The Valente estate rose before her, all stone and iron and cold, expensive light bleeding through tall windows, and she stood there getting soaked because the gates wouldn't open. She'd pressed the intercom 3 times already. Her thumb hovered over the button again, shaking, not from the cold, though October in Connecticut had no mercy. The shaking came from somewhere deeper, somewhere that knew this was a mistake but couldn't turn back now. Please, her voice cracked into the speaker. I just need 5 minutes. Tell him it's Ilara. Tell him... The intercom cut off with a click that sounded like a door slamming. She wrapped both arms around herself, the envelope in her coat pocket pressing against her ribs like an accusation. Inside it, folded and already softening from the rain seeping through the fabric, was a piece of paper that should have changed everything. An ultrasound image. Black and white and impossibly small. 7 weeks along, the doctor had said, smiling like this was good news. Ilara hadn't smiled back. She'd sat in that clinic alone, the paper gown crinkling every time she breathed, and thought about the last time she'd heard those words. You're pregnant. 3 years ago, when hope still lived in her chest instead of this hollow, scraped-out feeling. When Damien had kissed her so hard she'd tasted copper, spun her around the bedroom, promised her everything. Before the miscarriage, before he chose a gang war over sitting beside her hospital bed, before she became the wife he kept in the house like expensive furniture, beautiful, unused, gathering dust. Movement caught her eye. 2nd floor, east wing. A curtain shifted. Ilara's heart kicked against her sternum. For half a second she thought, Damien, but the silhouette was wrong. Too slight, too deliberately still, like whoever stood there wanted to be seen. The woman. Ilara didn't know her name, didn't want to, but she'd heard the whispers from staff who still pitied her, seen the way Damien's jaw tightened when she asked why he came home smelling like jasmine perfume. The woman had been a ghost for months, something Ilara could deny if she didn't look directly at it. Now the ghost was in her house, standing in a window that overlooked the gates, watching. The intercom crackled. Not Damien's voice. Marco's. The head of security, a man who'd once helped her carry groceries and now wouldn't meet her eyes. Mrs. Valente. Formal. Distant. Like she was a stranger asking for directions. Mr. Valente is unavailable. You should go home. I am home. The words tore out of her. Marco, please. I need to see him. It's important. He doesn't want to see you. The rain swallowed the sound of her breath hitching. She pressed her palm flat against the gate, iron cold enough to burn. Did he say that? Did you actually tell him I'm here? Silence. Marco. Go home, Ilara. Quieter now. Almost kind, which somehow made it worse. Before you catch pneumonia out here. The line went dead. She stood there for another minute, maybe 2, rain plastering her hair to her skull and turning her coat into a second skin. The lights in the east wing window went out. The curtain fell back into place. Whoever had been watching, the woman, some faceless servant, maybe nobody at all, was gone. Ilara pulled her hand back from the gate. Her palm left a print that the rain washed away immediately, like she'd never touched it at all. Like she'd never been here. The Uber driver who picked her up didn't ask questions, which was good because Ilara had no answers. She gave him an address, a hotel 20 minutes outside the city, the kind of place that took cash and didn't care why you showed up alone in the middle of the night. And then she stopped talking. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have come back. Her fingers went numb. She stared at the screen, rain-blurred streetlights sliding across the glass, waiting for another message. Nothing came. You okay back there? The driver's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror, concern crinkling the corners. Fine. She locked her phone. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. The hotel was worse than she'd imagined. Flickering vacancy sign, parking lot full of potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. The smell of mildew and old cigarettes baked into the walls. But it was warm, and it was far from the estate. And when she locked the door behind her for the first time in 6 hours, she could breathe. She peeled off her soaked coat, draped it over the shower rod, pulled the ultrasound from the pocket. The image had held up better than she'd expected. Still legible, still real. You're going to be a mother. The thought should have terrified her. Maybe it did. But underneath the fear, underneath the exhaustion and the humiliation of standing outside her own home like a beggar, there was something else. Something small and fierce and hers. This baby wouldn't grow up the way the first one almost did. Half-wanted, a bargaining chip in a marriage held together by contract and cold-blooded ambition. This baby wouldn't watch its father choose violence over family, wouldn't learn that love meant being second to territory disputes and body counts. This baby would be safe, even if that meant running. She sat on the edge of the bed, springs creaking, and pulled out her phone again. The unknown text stared back at her. You shouldn't have come back. Who the hell had sent it? Not Damien. He didn't make threats, he made examples. And he didn't know she'd left the estate tonight. She'd moved out 4 months ago, quietly, into an apartment across the city that he paid for without comment. A separation neither of them had the guts to name. Not Marco, not any of the security team. They were loyal to Damien down to their DNA, but they weren't cruel. The woman? Alara's jaw tightened. Maybe. If the woman thought Alara was competition, if she wanted to make sure the discarded wife stayed discarded, or maybe it was someone else entirely, someone who knew she'd driven out here tonight, who knew she was alone, who... Her phone buzzed again. Check your rearview mirror. Ice slid down her spine. She was in a hotel room. She didn't have a rearview mirror, unless... Oh God. The Uber! They'd sent the text while she was still in the car, which meant they'd been following her close enough to see, and she'd been too wrecked to notice. She stood up so fast the room spun, crossed to the window, yanked the curtain back. The parking lot sprawled below, shadows pooling between broken streetlights. Most of the spaces were empty, but in the far corner, barely visible, a black SUV sat with its engine running. No plates. Tinted windows. Watching. Alara's breath came short and sharp. She fumbled for her phone, fingers clumsy, pulled up Damien's number. She hadn't called him in 2 months, hadn't wanted to give him the satisfaction of hearing her need him. Now her thumb hovered over his name, and every instinct screamed, call him, call him, call him. Another text, don't. She dropped the phone like it had bitten her. It clattered onto the floor, screen down, and she stood there shaking in the middle of a room that suddenly felt like a trap. They were listening, or watching, or both. She grabbed her coat, still soaked, still cold, and her wallet and the ultrasound, shoving everything into her purse with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She had to move, had to get out, get somewhere public, somewhere with cameras and witnesses, and a knock at the door. Soft, polite, the kind of knock that came from someone who didn't need to break the door down because they knew you'd open it eventually. Mrs. Valente? A man's voice. Unfamiliar. Front desk. There's been a complaint about the noise. She hadn't made any noise. Alara backed toward the window, pulse hammering in her throat. The bathroom was tiny, no second exit. The window led to a 2-story drop onto concrete. And the door had a chain lock that wouldn't stop anyone serious, a deadbolt she'd turned the second she came in, and a man on the other side who was still knocking, still calling her name like he had every right to be there. I didn't make any noise, she said, loud enough to carry, steady enough to sound braver than she felt. And I didn't order room service. Go away. The knocking stopped. Silence pressed against the door, thick and waiting. Then, we just need a moment of your time. We. Alara's hand found her phone on the floor. She didn't look at the screen, didn't take her eyes off the door, just held down the power button until it vibrated, unlocked it by muscle memory, and dialed. Not Damien. 911. This is 911. What's your emergency? Someone's trying to break into my hotel room. Her voice came out calmer than she'd expected. Flat, like she was reporting weather. I'm at the roadside inn off Route 7, room 214. There's a vehicle outside, black SUV, no plates, and men at my door claiming to be staff, but I didn't call for. The door exploded inward, not a kick, something heavier. A battering ram, maybe, or a body built like one. The chain snapped, the deadbolt tore through the door frame, and then there were hands on her, rough, impersonal, gloved. And her phone was gone, her purse was gone. Someone had an arm around her waist, lifting her off the ground while she kicked and screamed and fought like a feral thing. Shut her up. Another voice, this one bored. We're on a schedule. Something pressed against her mouth, cloth, chemical sweet. She tried not to breathe, but her lungs were already burning, her vision already folding in at the edges, and the last thing she saw before the world went black was the ultrasound photo on the floor, trampled under a boot that didn't even slow down. She woke up to the smell of rust and motor oil. Alara's head pounded like something was trying to crack her skull open from the inside. She tried to move, couldn't. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back, plastic biting into skin already rubbed raw. Her ankles were bound too, cruder, rope instead of plastic, tight enough that her feet had gone numb. She was sitting on concrete. Cold seeped through her jeans, her coat was gone, and when she finally managed to pry her eyes open, the darkness was so complete she thought for a horrible second that she'd gone blind. Then her vision adjusted. Not blind, just underground or windowless, or both. The space around her was massive, a warehouse maybe, high ceilings lost in shadow, support beams like skeletal ribs. Somewhere far off, water dripped. Closer she could hear breathing that wasn't hers. She's awake. A shape moved in the dark, male, tall, stepping into a dim spill of light from somewhere above, and Alara's stomach dropped when she saw his face. She knew him. Not well. But she'd seen him at the estate, standing in rooms where Damien conducted business she wasn't supposed to understand. Nico Sarno. Mid-30s, sharp-dressed, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Damien's cousin. Part of the inner circle. Family. Ilara Moretti Valente. Nico crouched in front of her, elbows on his knees, studying her like she was a bug under glass. You really should have stayed away. Her mouth tasted like copper and chemicals. She swallowed, forced words past her raw throat. Where am I? Does it matter? What do you want? Nico tilted his head. Honestly, nothing from you. You're just leverage. A message. Damien's been getting too comfortable lately, making moves without consulting the people who put him in power. We're here to remind him that nobody's untouchable. He'll kill you. The words came out steady. Certain, because whatever else Damien was, absent, cold, cruel in his indifference, he didn't tolerate betrayal. You know that, right? When he finds out you took me, when? Nico laughed, sharp and ugly. Sweetheart, he's not looking for you. Why would he? You left him, remember? Moved out, stopped showing up at events, became the wife he pretends doesn't exist. For all he knows, you're halfway to California by now, finally smart enough to run. The truth of it hit like a fist. Because Nico was right. She had left. She had made herself invisible, and Damien had let her. Besides, Nico continued, standing up, brushing imaginary dust off his slacks, even if he does figure it out, even if someone tells him his estranged wife got snatched, what's he gonna do? Burn the city down for a woman he doesn't love anymore? Alara's pulse hammered in her wrists, in her throat, behind her eyes. She thought about the ultrasound, trampled and lost. She thought about the baby growing inside her, barely the size of a grape, with no idea that its mother was tied up in a warehouse by men who saw her as nothing more than a chess piece. She thought about Damien's face the last time she'd seen him, 3 weeks ago, passing in the hallway of the estate while she picked up the last of her things. He'd looked at her like she was a stranger, like she was already gone. He won't come, she said quietly. Nico's smile widened. I know. He turned to leave, footsteps echoing into the dark, and Alara was alone again. But not for long, because somewhere in the shadows, a phone was ringing. Damien Valente didn't sleep anymore. He used to. Years ago, when life was simpler and the only blood on his hands belonged to people who deserved it. Before he inherited an empire built on violence and compromise. Before he married a woman who looked at him like he was capable of being more than what he was. Before he destroyed her. Now he sat in his office at 3 a.m., staring at spreadsheets that didn't need his attention, drinking whiskey that didn't touch the edges of the thing living in his chest. Guilt, maybe. Or just exhaustion so bone deep it had become a permanent state. The house was quiet, too quiet. It had been that way since Alara left. He didn't blame her. He'd barely noticed her toward the end, too consumed by territory disputes and shifting alliances and the constant grinding work of staying on top. And when she'd packed her things and walked out, no screaming, no ultimatums, just a quiet closing of a door, he told himself it was for the best. She deserved better than him, better than this life, better than a man who'd let her lose their first child alone because he was too busy putting bullets in rivals who'd disrespected him at a card game. The whiskey in his glass caught the lamplight, amber and bitter. He lifted it, stopped halfway to his mouth. Someone was knocking, not at the office door. Downstairs. The front entrance. At 3 a.m, Damien set the glass down, pulled the gun from his desk drawer, a Glock, familiar weight, always loaded, and moved through the house like a ghost. Marco should have been at the gate, should have stopped anyone from getting close. Unless it was Marco. He checked the security monitor in the hallway. The camera showed a figure on the front steps, hunched against the rain that hadn't stopped since nightfall. Not Marco. Someone smaller. Shaking. A woman. Damien's hand tightened on the gun. He crossed to the door, flipped the deadbolt, yanked it open. Sophia stumbled inside, soaked and gasping, mascara running down her face in black streaks. She grabbed his arm with both hands, nails digging through his shirt, and the fear in her eyes was real enough to freeze his blood. They took her. Sophia's voice broke. Damien, they took Alara. The world went very still. What? She was here, tonight, at the gates, trying to see you. And I didn't know. I swear I didn't know until Marco told me. And by then she was already gone. And Sophia sucked in a breath that sounded like drowning. Someone followed her, black SUV. I saw it on the cameras. They followed her to a hotel, and then the feed cuts out. And Damien's hand shot out, gripped her shoulder hard enough to bruise. Where? Roadside Inn, Route 7. She was crying now, open and ugly. I called the front desk. They said room 214 was broken into. Police are there now, but Ilara's gone and there's blood on the floor, and he didn't hear the rest. He was already moving, across the foyer, through the garage, into the black Escalade that Marco kept gassed and ready. The engine roared to life and he was gone, tearing down the driveway fast enough to leave rubber, the gate swinging open just in time to let him through. His phone rang. He answered without looking. Sir? Marco's voice tight and controlled. We have a situation. I know about the situation. Damien took a corner too fast, tires screaming. You're going to tell me where she is, right now. I don't know where she is, but I know who took her. Damien's hands flexed on the wheel. Talk. Security footage from the hotel. 3 men, faces covered, but one of them had a ring. Sarno family crest. And the SUV's registered to a shell company we traced back to Nico. Nico. His cousin. His blood. The man who'd stood beside him at his wedding, who'd helped him consolidate power after his father died, who'd been in his inner circle for a decade. The man who'd just signed his own death warrant. Find him, Damien said, voice like gravel and ice. Find all of them. I want names, addresses, known associates. I want bank accounts frozen and safe houses burned. I want every person who touched her screaming by sunrise. Already on it. But sir, there's something else. What? A pause. Long enough that Damien's vision tunneled, the road ahead narrowing to a single point of focus. We found her purse in the hotel room, and inside, Marco's voice cracked. Just barely. Just enough. There's an ultrasound. She's pregnant. The Escalade swerved. Damien corrected, jaw locked so tight his teeth ached, and for a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but see it. Alara at the gates, soaked and desperate, trying to tell him. Alara in that hotel room, alone and terrified. Alara carrying his child while men who worked for him dragged her into the dark. He'd sent her away. He'd looked at the intercom screen, seen her standing there, and told Marco to turn her away because he was tired, because he'd convinced himself she was better off without him, because he was a coward who couldn't face what he'd done. And now she was gone. Damien? Marco's voice distant. What do you want me to do? He pulled over, slammed the gear shift into park, pressed his forehead against the steering wheel, and breathed through the rage that wanted to crack him open. When he spoke again, his voice was empty, hollow, the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. Burn it all down. The roadside inn looked like a crime scene because it was one. Yellow tape stretched across the doorway of room 214, flapping in the wind that hadn't died with the rain. Damien ducked under it without slowing, ignoring the uniformed cop who tried to step in his way. The kid took one look at his face and moved. The room was small, cheaper than anywhere Alara should have been. The door hung crooked on its hinges, frame splintered where something heavy had smashed through. Furniture was overturned, a chair on its side, lamp shattered, the mattress half off the bed like she'd fought. And she had. He could see it in the claw marks on the floor, the broken fingernail near the bathroom, the faint smear of blood on the windowsill where someone had grabbed her hard enough to break skin. Marco was already inside, crouched near the overturned nightstand with gloved hands examining something. He looked up when Damien entered, face grim. 3 sets of prints. All male. All in the system. Low-level muscle, the kind Nico uses for jobs he doesn't want traced back. Marco stood, holding up an evidence bag. Inside was Alara's phone, screen cracked. They left this. Probably figured it was already wiped or useless. Damien took the bag, turned it over. Can you pull anything off it? Already sent it to tech. But there's more. Marco crossed to the bed, picked up another evidence bag. This one held the ultrasound photo, creased and dirty from being stepped on. She came here straight from the estate, which means she drove all the way out in that storm to tell you, got turned away, and then, I know what happened. Damien's voice came out flat. Dead. He stared at the ultrasound, at the tiny shape barely visible in all that black and white, and felt something crack in his chest. How far along? 7 weeks, according to the date stamp. 7 weeks. 2 months since the last time he'd touched her, the night she'd shown up at the estate to collect her things, and he'd found her in their old bedroom standing by the window. He'd meant to let her go, had stood in the doorway telling himself she deserved better, that the kindest thing he could do was let her walk away clean. Then she'd turned around and looked at him, and he'd crossed the room and kissed her like a drowning man finding air. It had been desperate, ugly, the kind of sex that felt like goodbye even while it was happening. She'd cried after, silent tears she'd wiped away before he could pretend to care, and then she'd left. He hadn't called. She hadn't either, and now she was carrying his child, and he'd sent her into the night to die. Sir? Marco's voice cut through the noise in his head. We need to move. Nico's gone to ground, but we pulled his recent calls. He's been in contact with someone inside the estate, someone who knew Alara came to the gates tonight, knew exactly when she'd be vulnerable. Damien's head snapped up. Who? Still narrowing it down, but whoever it is, they've been feeding Nico information for weeks. Security schedules, your movements, financial transfers. This wasn't opportunistic. They've been planning it. Of course they had. Nico wasn't smart enough to orchestrate something like this alone, and he didn't have the guts to move against Damien without serious backing, which meant there were others. A faction. People who thought he'd gotten weak, that he cared more about a wife he'd thrown away than the empire he'd bled to build. They were right about the first part, wrong about the second. Lock down the estate, Damien said. Nobody leaves. I want everyone from security, staff, even the gardeners in the main hall within the hour. Anyone who doesn't show gets hunted. Marco nodded once and pulled out his phone, already dialing. Damien looked around the room one more time, at the broken door, the blood, the trampled ultrasound, and made a promise to the ghost of the woman who used to love him. He'd find her, and everyone who touched her would beg for the mercy of a bullet before he was done. The drive back to the estate took 12 minutes. Damien spent 11 of them on the phone, his voice cold and precise as he dismantled lives. First call. His head of security in Boston, ordering every port, airport, and bus station locked down. No one with ties to the Sarno family moved without being tracked. Second call. His contact in the police department, a captain who owed him 3 favors and a blind eye. The official investigation into Alara's disappearance would proceed exactly as slowly as Damien needed it to. Third call. His lawyer, waking the man from sleep to start freezing assets. Every account Nico touched, every property, every shell company. By morning, his cousin would have nothing but the clothes he was wearing and a target on his back. The last call he made to Luca De Luca, a man who ran the South Side with a brutality that made even Damien uncomfortable. They weren't friends, barely allies. But Luca had a daughter, and he understood what happened to men who put family in danger. "I need everything you have on Nico Sarno," Damien said without preamble. Locations, contacts, where he'd run if the world was burning. Luca was quiet for a moment. Then, "I heard about your wife. That's ugly business. Can you help or not?" "I can help. But it'll cost you." "Name it." "The docks. The ones you took from the Italians last year. I want them back." Damien's jaw tightened. Those docks were worth millions in revenue, controlled half the smuggling routes on the eastern seaboard. Giving them up would weaken his position, embolden rivals who were already circling. He didn't hesitate. "Done. Send me what you have." He hung up as the estate gates came into view, already open, Marco's team flooding the driveway with black SUVs and armed men who moved like they'd done this before. Because they had. Damien didn't build his empire by being soft, and the people who worked for him knew that mercy was a luxury reserved for those who'd earned it. No one here had. The main hall was chaos. Staff clustered in groups, whispering, eyes wide with fear. Security stood at attention, hands near their weapons, faces carefully blank. And in the center of it all, Sophia sat on the stairs, arms wrapped around herself, mascara still streaked down her face. She looked up when Damien entered, and something in her expression, guilt, maybe, or just exhaustion, made him want to put his fist through a wall. He didn't. Instead, he walked to the center of the room, and the noise died like someone had cut the power. "One of you," Damien said quietly, "sold out my wife." Silence. The kind that pressed against your eardrums. "You told Nico she was coming. You told him when, where, how long she'd be vulnerable. And because of that, she's gone." His gaze swept the room, cataloging faces, watching for the twitch, the swallow, the look away that would betray guilt. "I'm going to find out who. And when I do, I'm going to make sure you regret every breath you've taken since." Still nothing. But he could feel it. The tension pulling tighter, someone's nerve getting ready to snap. "Sir." One of the security guys stepped forward, younger, still green enough to think honesty mattered. "It wasn't any of us. We're loyal." "Loyal," Damien laughed, sharp and humorless. "You let armed men walk onto my property and take my wife. That's not loyalty. That's incompetence or complicity. And I don't care which." The kid's face went white. Marco appeared at Damien's shoulder holding a tablet. "We pulled the gate logs. Someone overrode the security protocols at 11:47 p.m., 43 minutes after Alara left. Gave external access to the cameras, disabled the perimeter alarms. It was done from inside the house." A murmur ran through the staff. Damien took the tablet, scanned the data. The override had been entered using an admin code. One of only 5 people had access. Marco. Himself. His head of household. And 2 senior security officers. He looked up, found the face he needed. Vincent Torres. 15 years with the family. Damien's father had trusted him, and Damien had kept him on out of respect for the old man's memory. Vincent stood near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Vincent," Damien said softly. "Come here." The room went still. Vincent didn't move. "Vincent?" Louder now. "Come. Here." For a moment, Damien thought he'd run. Thought he'd make this easier by bolting for the door and confirming everything. But Vincent was smarter than that, or maybe just more tired. He walked forward slowly and stopped 5 feet from Damien. "I didn't touch her," Vincent said. "I don't care what your logs say. I didn't help Nico take your wife." "Then who did?" "I don't know." Damien moved fast. One step, and he had Vincent by the throat, slammed against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The gun was in his other hand, pressed under Vincent's jaw, and every person in the room inhaled at once. "Try again," Damien said. Vincent's eyes bulged. He clawed at Damien's wrist, gasping, face going red. "Sir?" Marco's voice, calm but urgent. "If you kill him, we lose the information." Damien held on for another 3 seconds. Then he let go. Vincent collapsed, coughing, one hand at his throat. "Talk," Damien said, "or I'll let Marco have you, and he's not as patient as I am." Vincent sucked in air, eyes watering. "It wasn't me, but I know who—" He coughed again, winced. "Sophia." Every head turned. Sophia stood up from the stairs, face going from pale to bloodless. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Vincent straightened, still rubbing his throat. "You're the one who told Nico she was at the gates. You called him right after Marco turned her away. I saw the call logs. You think I don't check?" "I called him because I was worried." Sophia's voice pitched high, defensive. "Alara looked upset, and I thought—" "You thought you'd score points with Nico by telling him Damien's estranged wife was vulnerable." Vincent's laugh was bitter. "How much did he pay you?" "Nothing. I didn't—" "Enough." Damien turned to Sophia and she flinched. "Is it true? Did you call Nico?" Her mouth opened, closed. She looked around the room like someone might help her, but no one moved. "I didn't know what he was going to do," she whispered. "I swear, he just asked me to keep an eye on her, let him know if she showed up. I thought he was going to talk to her, maybe scare her into staying away from you. I didn't think—" "You didn't think." Damien's voice dropped to something quieter than rage. Colder. "You helped kidnap a pregnant woman because Nico asked nicely." Sophia's knees buckled. She grabbed the stair railing to stay upright. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "Where is she?" "I don't know. I swear I don't know. He didn't tell me. He just said—" Damien pulled the gun up, aimed it at her head. The room exploded into noise. Someone screamed. Marco shouted his name. Vincent stepped back with his hands raised, but Damien didn't lower the weapon. "Last chance," he said. "Where did Nico take her?" Sophia was crying now, open and snotty and ugly. "I don't know. Please, I don't know. He has places all over the city, warehouses and storage units, and I don't know which one. I swear, please don't—" He believed her. Unfortunately. Damien lowered the gun, not because she deserved mercy, because a corpse couldn't give him answers. "Get her out of my sight," he told Marco. "Lock her in the basement. If she tries to run, shoot her." Marco nodded, gestured to two of his men. They hauled Sophia up by her arms, and she didn't fight, just sobbed as they dragged her toward the back of the house. The rest of the staff stood frozen, waiting. Damien looked at them, at faces he'd known for years, people who'd served his family, who'd smiled at his wedding and pretended not to notice when his marriage fell apart. "If anyone else here helped Nico," he said quietly, "now's the time to speak. Because when I find out on my own, and I will, you won't get the chance to beg." No one spoke. He turned and walked out, Marco at his heels. Alara woke to the sound of footsteps. Her whole body ached, wrists screaming where the zip ties cut in, shoulders burning from the angle of her arms, head still pounding from whatever they'd used to knock her out. But the footsteps were close, getting closer, and she forced herself to stay still. Play dead. Or at least play unconscious. The steps stopped in front of her. Someone crouched down, and she could smell him, cigarettes and cheap cologne. "She's awake." Nico's voice, amused. "I can tell by the breathing. You're not as good an actress as you think, Alara." She opened her eyes. He was inches from her face, grinning like this was all a game. Behind him, two men stood with rifles slung over their shoulders, bored expressions like they'd done this 100 times. "How you feeling?" Nico asked. "Like I'm going to watch you die." Her voice came out hoarse but steady. Nico laughed. "There it is. That Valente fire. I always liked that about you. Most of the wives in this life, they're porcelain dolls, pretty, fragile, useless. But you?" He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she jerked away. "You've got teeth. Touch me again, and you'll lose the hand." Big talk for a woman tied up in a warehouse. "Damien's coming," Alara said. "You know that, right? He's going to find you, and when he does what? Kill me?" Nico stood, brushing off his knees. "Maybe. But here's the thing, Alara. I don't think he's coming. I think he's sitting in that big empty house, drinking expensive scotch, and telling himself you ran off on your own, because that's easier than admitting he failed you. You don't know him. I've known him since we were kids. I watched him build an empire on the backs of people he didn't care about. You think you're special? You think because you married him, you matter? Alara's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, wanted to throw his words back in his face, but the truth was jagged and close. Damien hadn't come to the gate, hadn't opened the door, hadn't even asked why she was there. He'd sent her away. And she'd driven straight into a trap because she'd been stupid enough to hope he might still care. Yeah. Nico watched her face, saw the moment the doubt crept in. That's what I thought. He turned to leave, and panic clawed up Alara's spine. Wait. He paused. Why? Her voice cracked. If you wanted to hurt him, there are easier ways. Why take me? Nico looked back over his shoulder, and for the first time his smile faded into something sharper, hungrier. Because empires fall from the inside, he said, and the fastest way to break a king is to take the one thing he thought he didn't care about anymore and prove he was wrong. Then he was gone, and Alara was alone again in the dark. She counted to 60, then another 60, made sure the footsteps didn't come back. Then she started working on the ropes. The zip ties on her wrists were industrial grade, the kind that wouldn't snap no matter how hard she pulled. But the rope on her ankles was different, older, fraying in places. Whoever tied her had rushed, looped it 3 times, but hadn't cinched the knot tight enough. Alara twisted onto her side, ignoring the way her shoulders screamed, and brought her knees to her chest. She couldn't reach the knot with her hands, but if she could hook her fingers under the rope, maybe pull it loose. The plastic bit deeper into her wrists. Blood, warm and slick, made her hands slip. She gritted her teeth and tried again. It took 20 minutes, maybe 30. Time moved strange in the dark, measured only by the drip of water somewhere and the burn in her muscles. But finally, the rope loosened. She kicked her feet, felt it slide over her ankles, and she was free. Half free. She sat up, breathing hard, and looked around. The warehouse was bigger than she'd thought. Rows of rusted machinery lined the walls, metal skeletons that might have been forklifts or conveyor belts once. High windows near the ceiling let in faint gray light, dawn maybe, or just the city's ambient glow. No guards in sight. Either Nico thought she was secure, or they were outside. Alara stood, legs shaking, and nearly fell. Her feet were numb, blood flow cut off for too long. She leaned against a support beam and forced herself to breathe through it, flexing her toes until the pins and needles feeling turned into pain, and then finally, sensation. Her hands were still bound. She needed something sharp. She moved through the warehouse slowly, listening for footsteps, checking shadows. Most of the machinery was useless, too rusted, edges worn smooth. But near the back, half hidden under a tarp, she found a workbench. Tools. Old, covered in grime, but tools. She grabbed a box cutter with her bound hands, fumbling, nearly dropped it, managed to wedge the handle between 2 fingers and angle the blade against the zip tie. The plastic was thick. It took forever, sawing back and forth, the blade slipping, her hands cramping. But eventually it gave, a sharp snap, and her hands were free. Alara dropped the box cutter, flexed her fingers, felt blood rush back in a wave of agony. She didn't have time to feel sorry for herself. She grabbed the box cutter again, checked the workbench for anything else useful, found a rusted screwdriver, a length of chain. Not much, but better than nothing. Then she heard it. Voices. Outside. Coming closer. She looked around, frantic. No back exit. No windows low enough to reach. Just the main door where Nico had left, and the voices were coming from that direction. Alara ran. Not toward the door. Toward the darkest corner of the warehouse, where the machinery was thickest and the shadows deepest. She climbed onto a pile of crates, wedged herself behind a rusted conveyor belt, and went still. The door opened. Light flooded in, and she pressed herself flatter, breath held. 2 men entered. Not Nico. The guards from before, maybe, or different ones. They were arguing. Don't see why we're babysitting. She's not going anywhere. Boss wants her alive until Valente makes contact. After that, who cares? You think he'll actually pay? Doesn't matter. Either he pays and we kill her anyway, or he doesn't and we kill her faster. They laughed. Alara's hand tightened on the box cutter. The men walked deeper into the warehouse, flashlights sweeping the floor. One of them stopped where she'd been tied, crouched down. Hey, she's gone. The other one spun, rifle up. What? The ropes are cut. She's fucking gone. Both flashlights swung wild, cutting through the dark. Alara didn't breathe. Find her, the first man snapped, Now, before Nico gets back. They split up. One headed toward the front, the other deeper in. The beams of their lights crisscrossed, searching, and Alara knew it was only a matter of time before one of them checked behind the machinery. She had two choices: hide and hope they missed her, or move. She moved. Quiet as she could, she climbed down from the crates, staying low. The man searching the back had his light pointed away from her, focused on the far wall. She had maybe 10 seconds. Alara ran, not toward the door, toward the nearest window. It was 12 feet off the ground, glass covered in decades of grime, but it was cracked, and if she could reach it— There! The shout came from behind her. Footsteps pounded. Alara grabbed a metal pipe leaning against the wall, swung it at the window. Glass shattered, loud enough to wake the dead. Hands grabbed her from behind, yanked her back. She spun, drove the box cutter into the man's shoulder. He screamed, "Let go," stumbled backward. The second man was on her before she could run, one arm around her waist, lifting her off the ground. She kicked, slashed with the box cutter, felt it catch fabric but not skin. He slammed her into the wall. Her head cracked against concrete, vision exploding white, and the box cutter clattered from her hand. "Stupid bitch," the man hissed in her ear. "You just made this so much worse." Alara's vision swam. She tasted copper, but through the haze, she saw it. The other man, the one she'd stabbed, pulling a gun from his belt. He aimed it at her head, and the warehouse door exploded inward. The door didn't just open, it came off the hinges. Metal shrieked, wood splintered, and then men in tactical gear poured through the opening like water from a broken dam. Flashlights mounted on rifles cut through the darkness, red laser sights painting the walls, and someone was shouting orders in a voice Alara recognized even through the ringing in her skull. Marco. The man holding her froze for half a second, long enough. A rifle shot cracked through the warehouse, and he dropped, taking Alara down with him. She hit the concrete hard, his weight crushing the air from her lungs, warm blood soaking through her shirt. Not hers. His. She shoved at the body, frantic, trying to get out from under him. Hands grabbed her, different hands, gentler, and pulled her free. "I got her!" someone shouted. "She's alive!" More gunfire. The man she'd stabbed was running, firing wild over his shoulder, and the tactical team lit him up. He went down hard, twitched once, and stopped moving. Then the warehouse was full of light and noise and people, and Alara couldn't process any of it. She was sitting on the ground, someone's jacket draped over her shoulders, and Marco was crouched in front of her asking questions she couldn't hear over the thunder in her ears. "Hurt? Alara, look at me. Are you hurt?" She tried to answer. Her mouth moved, but nothing came out. Marco's hand was on her shoulder, firm but not rough, and he was talking into his radio. "Target secured. She's in shock, but mobile. We need medical—" "Where is he?" Alara's voice came out raw, barely more than a whisper. "Where's Damien?" Marco's expression shifted. Not quite guilt, but close. "He's handling the rest of it. He sent us to get you." "The rest of what?" He didn't answer. Just helped her to her feet, one arm supporting her weight, when her legs decided they didn't want to work anymore. They walked her toward the door, past the bodies, past the blood spreading in dark pools across the concrete. Outside, dawn was breaking. Gray and cold, the kind of light that made everything look washed out and temporary. 3 black SUVs were parked in a half circle, engines running, more men in tactical gear standing watch with weapons ready. And leaning against the middle vehicle, phone pressed to his ear, was Damien. He looked up as they emerged, and whatever he was saying died mid-sentence. The phone dropped from his hand. He crossed the distance between them in 4 strides, and then Alara was being pulled into arms that shook, held so tight she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but feel the frantic hammering of his heart against her cheek. "You're alive." His voice was wrecked, broken. "You're alive, you're—" She pushed at his chest. Not hard, but enough that he loosened his grip, enough that she could look up at his face. He looked like hell. Eyes bloodshot, jaw dark with stubble, a cut above his eyebrow that was still bleeding. And the way he was staring at her, like she was the only thing in the world, like letting go would kill him, made something twist in her chest. "I'm fine," she said. "You're bleeding." "It's not mine." His hands moved to her face, tilting it toward the light, checking for injuries with a focus that would have been clinical if his fingers weren't trembling. When he touched the back of her head, where she'd hit the wall, she flinched. Damien went still. What happened? They slammed me into a wall. I'm fine. You're not fine. You need a hospital. I need answers. Alara pulled back, putting space between them, ignoring the way his hands dropped to his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. What's the rest of it? Marco said you were handling something. Damien's jaw tightened. He looked past her to Marco, and something passed between them, a conversation without words. Then Marco cleared his throat. I'll get the vehicle ready. He walked away, taking the rest of the team with him, and suddenly Alara and Damien were alone in a parking lot surrounded by warehouses standing in the debris of her kidnapping. Nico's dead, Damien said finally. So is everyone who helped him. The words landed flat, matter of fact, like he was telling her the weather. Alara stared at him. What? We tracked them to 3 locations, this warehouse, a safe house in Newark, and a storage facility Nico used for off-books deals. My team hit all 3 simultaneously. He paused. There were no survivors. You killed your own cousin. I killed the man who took my wife. The way he said it, no hesitation, no regret, sent ice down her spine. This was the Damien the rest of the world saw. The one who built an empire on fear and violence. The one she'd fallen in love with thinking she could soften him, save him, make him into something better. She'd been so stupid. How many people? She asked. Does it matter? How many, Damien? He met her eyes. 17. 17 lives. Gone. Because of her. Alara's knees buckled. She caught herself against the SUV, one hand braced on the hood, breathing through the nausea that rolled up her throat. They would have killed you, Damien said quietly. If we'd been an hour later, they would have put a bullet in your head and dumped you in the river. I'm not going to apologize for stopping that. I didn't ask you to apologize. Then what do you want? She turned to look at him, this man she'd married in a church full of people who'd bet on how long it would last. He stood there in the breaking dawn, covered in someone else's blood, looking at her like she was the only thing holding him together. And maybe she was. I want to know why, Alara said. Why you sent me away. Why you wouldn't even open the gate. Damien's expression shuddered. I didn't know it. That's not an answer. I thought you were better off without me. So you made that choice for both of us? Yes. No hesitation, just brutal honesty. Because I'm poison, Alara. Everyone who gets close to me ends up destroyed. My father, my brother, every friend I've ever had. They're all dead or broken or both. And you, his voice cracked, you were the one good thing I had, and I ruined you anyway. You didn't ruin me. You lost our baby because I wasn't there. The air went out of the parking lot. Alara stared at him, at the guilt written in every line of his face, and realized he'd been carrying this for 3 years. Not just the loss of the pregnancy, but the weight of failing her when it mattered most. That wasn't your fault, she said. I chose a gang war over being at the hospital with you. You were trying to protect us. I was trying to prove I was strong enough to run this empire. And while I was busy killing people who disrespected me at a poker game, you were alone in a hospital bed losing our child. He took a step toward her, stopped. So yeah, when you showed up at the gates tonight, I told Marco to send you away, because I thought the kindest thing I could do was let you go before I failed you again. Alara pressed her hand to her stomach, to the place where their second chance was growing. I'm pregnant. I know. I came to tell you. I know, and you still would have let me leave. Damien's hands curled into fists. I didn't know what else to do. You deserve better than this. Better than me. That's not your call to make. Then whose is it? Mine. Alara pushed off the SUV, crossed the space between them. I'm the one who stayed after the miscarriage. I'm the one who kept trying even when you shut me out. I'm the one who drove through a storm to tell you about this baby because I thought... Her voice broke. Because I still believed somewhere in there was the man I married. Damien was looking at her like she'd gutted him. Alara, I don't want your guilt, she said. I don't want your self-flagellation or your martyr routine. If you're going to push me away, do it because you don't love me anymore, not because you think it's what's best for me. I never stopped loving you. The words hung between them, raw and too honest. Then prove it, Ilara said. Stop choosing the Empire over us. Stop pretending you're doing me favors by shutting me out. And if you're going to be in this baby's life, if you're going to be in my life, then be in it. All the way. Not halfway. Not when it's convenient. Damien reached for her, hesitated, like he was afraid she'd disappear if he touched her. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need. Start by trying. He pulled her into his arms then, careful this time, like she was made of glass. She fit against him the way she always had, her head tucked under his chin, his heartbeat steady against her ear. I'm sorry, he said into her hair, for all of it, for failing you, for letting you go, for not being there when it mattered. Ilara closed her eyes. Take me home. The hospital first. Home, Damien. Please. He didn't argue. The ride back to the estate was quiet. Damien kept one hand on Ilara's knee, thumb tracing absent circles through the denim, like he needed the physical confirmation she was real. Marco drove, eyes on the road, pretending not to notice when Ilara's head dropped onto Damien's shoulder, and she fell asleep despite everything. She woke up as they pulled through the gates, the same gates that had been locked against her hours ago. Now they swung open without resistance, and the house beyond looked different in daylight, smaller, less like a fortress, more like just a building. Damien helped her out of the SUV, his hand on her lower back, steadying her when she swayed. Easy, he murmured. You've been through hell. I'm pregnant, not broken. You're both. She wanted to argue, but the truth was her whole body hurt. Her head throbbed, her wrists were raw and bleeding where the zip ties had cut in, and now that the adrenaline was fading, exhaustion hit like a freight train. Inside, the house was chaos. Staff rushed around, cleaning up from whatever interrogation had happened earlier, and when they saw Ilara, they stopped, stared. Someone dropped a tray. Get back to work, Damien said, not loudly, but the effect was immediate. Everyone scattered. He led her upstairs to the master bedroom she hadn't slept in for 4 months. It looked the same, huge bed, floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture that matched nothing because Damien had never cared about interior design. But her things were gone. The photos from her nightstand, the books she'd been reading, the robe that used to hang on the bathroom door. She'd taken it all when she left, and he hadn't replaced any of it. Sit, Damien said, guiding her to the bed. I'm calling a doctor. I'm fine. You have a head injury and you're pregnant. You're not fine. He was already pulling out his phone. Ilara caught his wrist. After. Let me shower first. Please. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll be right outside. Damien? I'm not leaving you alone. Not after... He stopped, jaw working. Just shower. I'll be here when you're done. The bathroom was exactly as she'd left it. White marble, glass shower, towels so thick they could double as blankets. Ilara turned the water as hot as it would go and stepped under the spray, letting it wash away the blood and grime and the feeling of hands grabbing her in the dark. She stood there until the water ran cold, until her skin was pink and raw, until she'd scrubbed every inch twice, and it still didn't feel like enough. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, Damien was sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression cracked. I thought I lost you, he said quietly. When Marco called and said the hotel room was empty, that there was blood, I thought... He stopped, swallowed. I thought I'd killed you by sending you away. Ilara crossed the room, stood in front of him. He looked up at her, and she'd never seen him like this. Vulnerable. Scared. Human. I'm here, she said. I know. I'm not going anywhere. You should. His hands came up, settled on her hips over the towel. You should take the baby and run as far from me as you can, because this life, what happened tonight, it's going to keep happening. There will always be someone trying to use you to get to me. Then stop giving them the chance. What? If you're worried about me being leveraged, stop putting yourself in positions where people think they can challenge you. Ilara's hand settled on his shoulders. You've spent years building this empire by being the scariest man in the room. Maybe it's time to be smart instead. Damien's thumbs traced the edge of the towel. What are you saying? I'm saying consolidate. Make alliances instead of enemies. Stop running your organization like a dictatorship and start running it like a business. She paused. Or walk away entirely. Go legitimate. You've got enough money. We could disappear. Start over somewhere nobody knows your name. You want me to abandon everything I've built. I want you to choose us over power. His grip tightened. If I walk away, someone else will take over. Someone worse. And all the people I've protected, all the deals I've made to keep the city from tearing itself apart, they'll mean nothing. So don't walk away. Change it from the inside. Alara cupped his face, made him look at her. You're not your father. You don't have to rule through fear. Find another way. There is no other way. Then make one. He stared at her, and she could see it, the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to believe her fighting against the part that had been raised in blood and violence, that knew power was the only currency that mattered in their world. Finally, he spoke. If I do this, if I try, I need you to promise me something. What? If it goes wrong, if someone comes for you again, you run. You take the baby and you disappear and you don't look back. Damien, promise me, Alara. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that wasn't how marriage worked, that she wasn't going to abandon him the second things got hard. But the look in his eyes, desperate and terrified and trying so hard not to show it, stopped her. I promise, she said quietly, but it won't come to that. You don't know that. Neither do you. He pulled her down onto his lap, careful of her injuries, and buried his face in her neck. She could feel him shaking, or maybe that was her, or maybe it was both of them finally falling apart after the longest night of their lives. I love you, he said against her skin. I'm sorry I stopped saying it. I'm sorry I stopped showing it. But I never stopped feeling it. Alara's eyes burned. She wrapped her arms around him, held on tight. I love you too, even when I hate you, he laughed, broken and wet. That's fair. They stayed like that for a long time, tangled together on the edge of the bed, until the sun came up properly and painted the room in shades of gold. The doctor arrived an hour later. An older woman, someone Damien trusted, who'd been patching up people in their world for decades and knew when not to ask questions. She examined Alara thoroughly, checked her head, her wrists, listened to her heart, and took her blood pressure. Then she pulled out a portable ultrasound machine, and Alara's breath caught. Let's see how the little one's doing, the doctor said gently. The gel was cold. The wand pressed against Alara's stomach, and for a horrible moment there was nothing but static on the screen. Then a heartbeat, fast and strong, filling the room. Alara exhaled, tears sliding down her temples. There we are, the doctor said, smiling. Looks good. Strong heartbeat, measuring right on track for 7 weeks. She turned the screen so they could see better. See that flicker? That's the heart. Damien was staring at the screen like it held the secrets of the universe. His hand found Alara's, squeezed tight. Everything's okay? He asked. Everything's fine. Mama's been through trauma, so we'll want to monitor closely, but the baby's resilient. The doctor wiped the gel off, packed up her equipment. Bed rest for the next week. No stress, no excitement, and I want to see you for a follow-up in 3 days. Thank you, Alara said. The doctor patted her hand. You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Valente, but don't push it. After she left, Damien sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the printout from the ultrasound. 7 weeks, he said quietly. That night you came for your things. Yeah. If I'd known, you know now. He looked up at her. I'm not going to fail you again, either of you. I know. I mean it, Alara. Whatever it takes, I'll make this right. She believed him, or at least she believed he believed it. Whether he could actually follow through, whether a man built from violence could unmake himself into something softer, remained to be seen. But for now, lying in a bed that used to be theirs, watching him stare at their baby's first photo like it was the most precious thing in the world, she had hope. And maybe that was enough. The next 3 days passed in a blur of doctors and lawyers, and Damien systematically dismantling everyone who'd been involved in the kidnapping. Alara wasn't allowed to leave the bedroom, doctor's orders, but she could hear the chaos below. Phones ringing constantly. Raised voices. The sound of furniture being moved. Damien came and went, always checking on her first, making sure she had everything she needed. He brought her food, sat with her while she ate, and told her things he'd never shared before. About his childhood, growing up in a house where love was transactional and violence was the primary language. About his brother, who died in a botched hit when Damien was 19, and how he'd spent the next decade making sure everyone involved paid. About the night his father had put a gun in his hand and told him to prove he was worthy of the family name by killing a man who'd skimmed money from their operations. Damien had been 15. "I pulled the trigger," he said, staring at his hands. "Didn't even hesitate. And my father smiled, told me I was finally a man." Ilara's heart ached. "You were a child. I was a weapon. That's all I've ever been." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" He looked at her. "Every decision I've made, every relationship I've had, it all comes back to power. Even marrying you. It was strategic, a way to ally with your father's connections. I told myself I loved you, but maybe I just loved what you represented." Ilara sat up, ignoring the twinge in her head. "Do you still believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." "Then let me tell you what I know." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "You're going to be a father, and you get to decide what kind. You can be like your father, or you can be better. But you have to choose." His hand was warm through the thin fabric of her nightgown. "What if I don't know how to be better?" "Then we figure it out together." On the fourth day, Marco knocked on the bedroom door with news. "We found the last of them," he said. "Nico's contacts in the police department, the ones who were feeding him information. They're in custody." Damien stood from where he'd been sitting beside the bed, reading while Ilara napped. "How many?" "3 officers, 2 detectives, 1 captain." "The captain who owed me favors?" Marco nodded. Damien's expression went cold. "Handle it." "Already done. They'll be arraigned tomorrow on unrelated charges. By the time they get out, if they get out, they'll be too scared to talk." "Good." Damien paused. "What about Sophia?" Marco's jaw tightened. "Still in the basement." Ilara was awake now, listening. "What are you going to do with her?" Both men looked at her. "She helped kidnap you," Damien said carefully. "The standard response is—" "I know what the standard response is." Ilara sat up, pulled the blanket around herself. "I want to talk to her." "No." "Damien, no. You're supposed to be resting, and I'm not letting that woman anywhere near you." She didn't know what Nico was planning. She made a choice. She called him, gave him information, and you almost died because of it. And she has to live with that. Ilara met his eyes. "Killing her won't change anything. But maybe she can be useful in other ways." Damien stared at her like she'd suggested they adopt a pet tiger. "You want to spare her." "I want to give her a choice. Work for us or face the consequences." Ilara paused. "You said you wanted to change how you run things. Start here." Marco cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, she's been cooperating. Gave us names, locations, everything Nico told her. She's terrified." "She should be," Damien said flatly. "Let me talk to her," Ilara said again. "Please." He didn't want to. She could see it in every line of his body, the way his hands curled into fists, the muscle jumping in his jaw. But finally, he nodded. "Fine, but I'm coming with you." They brought Sophia up from the basement an hour later. She looked like she'd aged a decade in 4 days. Hair unwashed, eyes red and swollen, hands shaking as Marco guided her into the sitting room where Ilara waited. When she saw Ilara, she burst into tears. "I'm sorry," Sophia sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what he was going to do." "Sit down," Ilara said quietly. Sophia sat, still crying, and Damien stood behind Ilara's chair like a guard dog ready to attack. "You helped them take me," Ilara said. "You called Nico, told him I was vulnerable, and because of that I was kidnapped and nearly killed." I know, and I'm sorry. I'll do anything." "Stop apologizing." Ilara's voice was sharp enough to cut through the hysteria. "I don't want your apologies. I want the truth. Why did you do it?" Sophia wiped her face with shaking hands. Nico said if I helped him, he'd give me a place in the organization. A real place. Not just being someone's mistress or arm candy. He said Damien was getting weak, that someone needed to step up, and if I proved myself, you thought you'd get power, Ilara finished. I thought I'd get respect. Sophia's voice cracked. I've been in this world my whole life. My father, my brothers, they're all part of it. But I'm a woman, so I'm only good for looking pretty and keeping my mouth shut. Nico promised me more. Damien made a disgusted sound. And you believed him. I was desperate. Sophia looked up at Ilara. You don't know what it's like being invisible. You were his wife. You had a place. People respected you even if they didn't respect him. But me, I was nothing. Ilara studied her. This woman who'd stood in her window, watched her beg at the gates, and done nothing. She should hate her. Part of her did. But another part, the part that had spent years feeling invisible herself, that knew what it was like to be seen only as an accessory to a powerful man, understood. You have two choices, Ilara said finally. You can leave. Damien will give you money, enough to start over somewhere else, and you'll never come back here. Or you can stay, work for me, and maybe earn the respect you're looking for. Sophia's head jerked up. Work for you? I need someone who understands how this world works, someone who knows the players and the games. You made a mistake, but you can fix it. Ilara leaned forward. But if you betray me again, if you even think about it, I won't be as forgiving as I'm being now. Behind her, Damien was silent, watching. Sophia looked between them, eyes wide. You're serious? Dead serious. Why? After what I did, why would you trust me? I don't, Ilara said bluntly. But I'm willing to give you a chance to earn it. What you do with that chance is up to you. For a long moment, Sophia just stared. Then she nodded, once, sharp and decisive. Okay, she said. I'll stay. I'll work. And I swear I won't let you down. You better not. Marco escorted Sophia out, and then Ilara was alone with Damien again. He moved around the chair, crouched in front of her. That was either brilliant or insane. Maybe both. She could still betray you. She could. But everyone deserves a second chance. Ilara touched his face. You taught me that. His eyes darkened. I never gave you a second chance. You gave me one. Then maybe it's time we both start believing people can change. Damien kissed her, soft and careful, like she might break. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. I love you, he said, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you. You already do. Not yet, but I will. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and for the first time in 3 years, Ilara looked at the man she'd married and saw not the empire he'd built, but the person he might still become. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The first week back at the estate, Ilara barely left the bedroom. Not because Damien insisted, though he did, but because her body had other plans. The exhaustion hit in waves, pulling her under at odd hours. She'd be reading, and suddenly it was 3 hours later, the book open on her chest, sunlight shifted across the floor. Damien worked from the bedroom more often than not, set up his laptop on the sitting area, took calls in a voice low enough not to wake her, and somehow managed to run an empire while watching her sleep like she might disappear if he looked away. On the 8th day, she woke to find him gone, and panic spiked through her chest before she heard water running in the bathroom. The door was cracked, steam seeping out, and she found him standing at the sink in just his pants, staring at his reflection like he didn't recognize it. You okay? She asked from the doorway. He didn't startle, just met her eyes in the mirror. Can't sleep. It's 4 in the afternoon. Haven't slept in 3 days. Ilara crossed the bathroom, came up behind him. There were shadows under his eyes deep enough to bruise, and his hands gripped the edge of the sink, white-knuckled. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing. Damien. He exhaled long and slow. I keep seeing it. The warehouse. What they did to you. What could have happened if we'd been 10 minutes later? But you weren't. That's not the point. Then what is? He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. I can't stop thinking about all the ways I could have prevented it. If I'd opened the gate when you came, if I'd answered your calls over the past 4 months, if I'd been a better husband from the start. Stop. Alara put her hand on his chest, felt his heart racing. You can't rewrite history. It happened. I'm here. We're okay. You almost weren't. But I am. She took his hand, placed it on her stomach, still flat, no visible sign of the life growing inside, but they both knew it was there. We both are. His hand spread wide, covering as much as it could. I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up. You probably will. So will I. That's how parenting works. I don't know how to be a father. Nobody does until they are one. Alara moved closer, until there was no space between them. But you get to decide what kind you want to be, and whatever you choose, I'll be there. Damien rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway. He laughed, quiet and broken, and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promise and fear and hope all mixed together. That night, he slept. Not well, but for 6 hours straight, and when Alara woke in the early morning to find him still beside her instead of pacing the halls, she counted it as progress. By the second week, she was allowed out of bed for short periods. The doctor came for a follow-up, declared everything looked good, and cleared her for light activity. No stress, no heavy lifting, and if anything felt wrong, she was to call immediately. Can I leave the house? Alara asked. The doctor looked at Damien, who looked like he wanted to say no. Short trips, the doctor said carefully. Nothing strenuous, and someone should be with you. Damien's jaw tightened, but he nodded. The next morning, Alara announced she wanted to go to the apartment, the one she'd been living in before the kidnapping, the place that technically was still hers, even though she hadn't been back since that night. Why? Damien asked. Because I left things there. Clothes, books, my laptop. And I need to see it. I'll have Marco pack everything up and bring it here. That's not the same. He studied her face, looking for something. You're not planning to move back there. It wasn't a question. No, Alara said, but I need to close that chapter properly. I left in the middle of the night to come see you, and then everything went to hell. I need to go back. Damien didn't look happy about it, but he didn't argue. I'm coming with you. I figured. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Dishes in the sink from a dinner she'd eaten alone. A book face down on the couch, spine cracked from being left open too long. Her keys on the counter next to the purse she hadn't taken that night because she'd grabbed a smaller bag for the drive. It felt like walking into a museum of her own life. Everything preserved but wrong, like it belonged to someone else. Damien stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her move through the space. This is what you wanted? This apartment? It was quiet, Alara said. No one telling me where to be or what to do. No reminders of... She stopped. Of me. Of us. Of what we used to be. He moved into the room, looking around at the sparse furniture, the bare walls. You hate decorating. I hate pretending. What does that mean? Alara picked up the book from the couch, closed it. Decorating felt like admitting I was going to stay here, like I was building a life without you. And I didn't want to do that, even when I thought I should. Damien crossed to her, took the book from her hands, set it aside. You should have stayed angry, should have moved on, found someone who deserved you. I tried. Spent 4 months convincing myself I was better off alone. She looked up at him. Didn't take. Why not? Because I'm an idiot who loves a man who spent the last 3 years proving he's terrible at relationships. That's fair. And because, she paused, choosing her words carefully, because I saw what you could be. That night we got married, the way you looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. I kept hoping I'd see that again. You did, at the warehouse, when you were covered in someone else's blood and traumatized, and I couldn't do anything but hold you, and thank God you were alive. That's not quite what I had in mind. Damien's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I'll work on better timing. They packed up her things together, clothes folded into suitcases, books boxed up, the few personal items she'd brought from the estate carefully wrapped. It didn't take long. She hadn't accumulated much, hadn't let herself get comfortable. When they were done, Damien stood in the empty living room, looking at the space she'd carved out without him. I'm sorry, he said quietly, that you felt like you had to leave. I'm sorry I didn't leave sooner. Maybe if I'd walked away 3 years ago, I wouldn't have spent so long being miserable. Or maybe we'd be divorced and you'd be raising this baby alone. Alara considered that. Would you have let me go that easily? No, but I would have made both our lives hell trying to hold on. You already did that. He flinched, but didn't argue. They drove back to the estate in silence, the trunk full of her old life. And when they pulled through the gates, Alara felt something shift. Not quite relief, not quite resignation, just acceptance that this was where she belonged, for better or worse. The changes started small. Damien began coming home for dinner. Not every night. There were still emergencies, still meetings that ran late. But more often than not, he was there. They ate in the dining room instead of him taking meals in his office, and he asked her about her day like it mattered. He attended every doctor's appointment, sat in the chair beside her, held her hand during the ultrasounds, and asked questions that made the doctor smile. When they found out the baby was a boy at 12 weeks, Damien stared at the screen for a full minute without speaking. In the car afterward, he said, "I don't know how to raise a son." "You'll figure it out." "What if I turn him into me?" "Then I'll be there to balance you out." Alara squeezed his hand. "And what if you turn him into something better?" He didn't answer, just held her hand tighter. The changes got bigger. Damien started delegating more, trusting his lieutenants to handle problems that used to require his direct involvement. He pulled back from the violent side of the business, let Marco and his team handle enforcement while he focused on the legitimate operations. It wasn't a clean break. There were still nights he came home with blood on his clothes, still mornings he left before dawn to handle situations that couldn't wait. But he was trying, and Alara saw it in the way he checked his phone less during dinner, the way he listened when she talked instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. One night, 3 months after the kidnapping, she found him in what used to be a guest bedroom. He'd cleared out the furniture, painted the walls a soft gray, and was assembling a crib that looked like it required an engineering degree. "You're nesting," she said from the doorway. Damien looked up, screwdriver in hand. "This is harder than it looks." "Want help?" "You're supposed to be resting." "I've been resting for 3 months. I'm going insane." She came into the room, picked up the instruction manual he'd thrown aside. "Besides, I'm better at following directions than you are." They worked in comfortable silence, Alara reading instructions while Damien assembled, and by the time the sun set, they had a functional crib. It sat in the middle of the empty room, waiting for the life that would fill it. "We need a name," Alara said, running her hand along the railing. "I know. Any ideas?" Damien was quiet for a moment. "I always liked Michael, my brother's middle name." Alara remembered the stories he'd told her about his brother, the one who'd died too young, who tried to protect Damien from their father's worst impulses and paid for it. "Michael," she repeated. "I like it." "Yeah?" "Yeah, Michael Valente. It's strong." Damien moved to stand beside her, one hand joining hers on the crib. "Think he'll forgive us for bringing him into this mess?" "I think he won't know any different. This will just be his normal." "That's what I'm afraid of." "Then we make sure his normal is better than ours was." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light she could see the man she'd married. Not the crime boss, not the empire builder, just Damien, scared and hopeful and trying. "I'm going to propose something," he said carefully, "and you can say no." "Okay? I want to step back, not completely, not yet, but I want to shift more of the operations to people I trust, legitimize as much as I can, and focus on being here. With you, with Michael." He paused. "I don't want to be my father. I don't want our son to grow up watching me choose violence over family." Alara's throat tightened. "What does that look like, practically?" "Marco takes over day-to-day operations. I handle strategy and the legitimate businesses. We sell off the parts of the empire that are too dirty to clean. And we—" He stopped, like the words were hard to say. "We build something different, something Michael can be proud of instead of ashamed." "That's not a small change." "I know. People are going to see it as weakness. Let them. They might challenge you. Then I'll handle it. But I'm done letting this life dictate everything." Damien took both her hands. "I almost lost you because I was too busy playing king. I'm not making that mistake again." Alara searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. Found neither. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." The transition wasn't smooth. Within a week of Damien announcing the restructure, 3 of his captains asked for meetings. Not hostile exactly, but testing. Seeing if he was really stepping back or if this was some kind of play. Alara wasn't supposed to be at those meetings, but she showed up anyway, walked into the conference room where 5 men sat around a table looking at Damien like he'd lost his mind. "Mrs. Valente," one of them said, standing. The others followed, awkward and uncertain. "We didn't know you'd be joining us." "I wasn't planning to." Alara took the empty chair beside Damien. "But then I heard you were questioning my husband's decisions, and I thought I should clarify a few things." The room went quiet. "Damien's not stepping back because he's weak," she continued. "He's stepping back because he's smart enough to know that running an empire by yourself is how you burn out or get killed. He's building something sustainable, something that lasts beyond him." She looked at each of them in turn. "If you have a problem with that, now's the time to say so, because once we move forward, there's no going back." The oldest captain, a man named Sal, who'd worked for Damien's father, leaned back in his chair. "With respect, Mrs. Valente, this is business, not family matters." "With respect," Alara said, "everything is family matters. That's the point. You think the people gunning for Damien care about the difference? They'll come for all of us if they sense weakness." She paused. "So either you're in or you're out. But you don't get to be halfway." Sal studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, slow and surprised. "You're just like your husband said, tougher than you look." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." Sal looked at Damien. "All right, I'm in. But if this goes sideways, I reserve the right to say I told you so." "Fair enough." The others fell in line after that, some more reluctantly than others. But by the time the meeting ended, they had a plan. Marco would handle enforcement. Sal would oversee the legitimate businesses. And Damien would act as final authority without being buried in daily operations. After everyone left, Damien turned to Alara. "That was either brave or stupid. You married me. You should know by now I'm both." He laughed, pulled her into his lap. "Thank you." "For what?" "For backing me up, for not letting them see doubt." "I don't have doubt. You're doing the right thing." "You sure about that?" "No, but I'm sure about you." He kissed her, soft and grateful, and Alara thought maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. The next month brought more changes. Damien sold 3 of his shadier operations to other families, took losses to get out clean. He pulled money out of offshore accounts and invested in legitimate businesses, real estate, a security company, even a small tech startup that Marco's cousin was running. It wasn't a complete transformation. There were still parts of the empire too entangled to untangle, still violence on the edges when rival families tested boundaries. But it was progress. Alara's belly grew, and with it came a weird sense of normalcy. She started redecorating the nursery properly, with Sophia's help. The woman had proven useful, smart, organized, and paranoid enough to catch potential threats before they became problems. "I still don't trust her completely," Damien said one night, watching Sophia through the window as she left the estate. "Neither do I, but she's trying. Because she's scared. Fear's a good motivator." He pulled Alara close, one hand resting on her swollen stomach. 6 months now, Michael's kick's strong enough to feel from the outside. "You're too forgiving. You're too suspicious. We balance each other out." "That's what I keep telling you." At 7 months, Alara started having nightmares. Not every night, but often enough that Damien started sleeping lighter, ready to wake her before the dreams got too bad. They were always the same. The warehouse, the zip ties cutting into her wrists, the gun pointed at her head. But in the dreams, Damien didn't come. The door stayed closed, and the shot fired, and she'd wake up gasping with her hands on her stomach, terrified that the baby was gone. "It's just anxiety," the therapist said when Alara finally admitted she was having them. "Perfectly normal after trauma, especially combined with pregnancy hormones. But we should work through it." So she did. 2 sessions a week talking about the kidnapping, about her marriage, about the fear that she was bringing a child into a world too dangerous to survive. Damien started coming to some sessions. Not all of them. Some things she needed to work through alone, but enough that the therapist could see them together, could help them navigate the landmines their relationship had become. You hold a lot of resentment, the therapist said to Alara during one joint session. Toward Damien, toward yourself. That's not going to disappear overnight. I don't expect it to. But you expect him to fix it. Alara looked at Damien sitting in the chair beside her with his hands clasped between his knees. I expect him to try. And if trying isn't enough, then we deal with that when it happens. The therapist turned to Damien. What about you? What do you expect from Alara? Nothing, he said quietly. She's already given me more than I deserve. That's not an answer. What do you want from this relationship? Damien was quiet for a long time. Then, I want her to look at me the way she used to, before I ruined everything. I want to be the person she fell in love with instead of the person she learned to tolerate. Alara's chest tightened. I don't tolerate you. Don't you? He met her eyes. Be honest. How many times in the last 3 years have you looked at me and thought about leaving? She wanted to lie, wanted to tell him never, that she'd always believed in them. But the therapist was right about resentment, and it had been building for longer than she wanted to admit. A lot, she said finally, almost every day after the miscarriage, and most days after that. Damien absorbed that like a hit, but didn't look away. Why didn't you? Because leaving felt like admitting I'd failed, and I didn't want to be another person you destroyed. So you stayed and let me destroy you slowly instead. I stayed because I loved you. Even when I hated you, I loved you. That's not healthy. No, Alara agreed. It's not. The therapist let the silence sit for a moment, then, where do you want to be a year from now, both of you? Alara thought about it. I want to trust him again, not just with the big things, but with the small things. I want to believe when he says he'll be home for dinner, he'll actually be there. I want to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. And you? The therapist asked Damien. I want to deserve her trust. I want to be the husband and father I should have been from the start. He paused. And I want to stop feeling like I'm one mistake away from losing everything that matters. That's a lot of pressure. I know. Have you considered that maybe some of that pressure is coming from inside? That you're punishing yourself more than Alara is? Damien didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. After the session, they sat in the car for a long time without starting the engine. Was I too honest? Alara asked finally. No, you were exactly honest enough. Damien's hands gripped the steering wheel. I knew you thought about leaving, I just didn't know how often. Does it change anything? Should it? I don't know. He turned to look at her and his eyes were red-rimmed. I'm sorry for all of it, for being someone you wanted to leave. I'm sorry I stayed without telling you how much I was hurting. Don't apologize for that. That's on me. It's on both of us. We're both responsible for how broken this got. Damien reached over, took her hand. So how do we fix it? One day at a time, I guess. Keep showing up, keep trying. That's it? That's everything. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. One day at a time. At 8 months pregnant, Alara was huge and uncomfortable and so tired of being pregnant she could scream. Everything hurt, her back, her hips, her feet. She couldn't sleep because Michael had decided nighttime was party time, couldn't eat more than a few bites without feeling sick, and her patience was worn down to nothing. Damien took the brunt of her mood swings without complaint, brought her ice cream at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, rubbed her feet while she watched terrible reality TV, and didn't point out when she cried over a commercial about puppies. I hate this, she said one night, sprawled on the couch because sitting upright was impossible. I hate being pregnant, I hate feeling like a whale, and I hate that everyone keeps telling me it'll be worth it. It will be. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. That's because you're not the one whose body feels like it's trying to turn inside out. Damien crouched beside the couch, pushed hair out of her face. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just be here. That's all I need. I'm not going anywhere. 2 weeks before her due date, Alara woke at 3 a.m. to wetness and a pain so sharp it stole her breath. Damien was up immediately, phone in hand, calling the doctor, while Alara tried to remember how to breathe through contractions. It's too early, she gasped. He's not supposed to come yet. 2 weeks isn't too early. The doctor said any time after 37 weeks is fine. Damien was already dressed, helping her into shoes, grabbing the hospital bag they'd packed a month ago. You're okay. We're okay. They weren't okay. The contractions were coming fast. Too fast. And by the time they got to the hospital, Alara was barely coherent. The doctor took one look at her and ordered immediate intervention. The baby's in distress, she said calmly, too calmly. We need to do an emergency C-section. What? Alara tried to sit up, but another contraction hit and she collapsed back. No, I can do this. Just give me... Alara! Damien's face was white. Listen to her. His heart rate is dropping, the doctor said. We don't have time to wait. I need you to trust me. Alara looked at Damien, saw her own terror reflected in his eyes, and nodded. Everything happened fast after that. They wheeled her into an operating room, gave her an epidural that barely took the edge off, and draped a sheet across her chest so she couldn't see what they were doing. Damien sat beside her head, holding her hand so tight she thought bones might break. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. If something happens, nothing's happening. You're both going to be fine. But if... No. His voice was steel and terror. You don't get to do that. You don't get to give up. Not now. Alara wanted to argue, but the pressure on her stomach increased, and suddenly the doctor was saying, Here we go. And there was a moment of pulling and pressure, and then a cry. Small and angry, and the most beautiful sound Alara had ever heard. It's a boy, the doctor said, and Damien's hand loosened in hers. Is he okay? Alara tried to see, but the sheet blocked everything. Let me see him, please. They brought Michael over, still covered in vernix and blood, his face scrunched up and furious at being evicted from his warm home. The nurse placed him on Alara's chest for just a moment, long enough for her to feel the weight of him, see his eyes open and focus on her face, before they took him away to clean him up. Damien watched them go like he'd forgotten how to move. He's okay, the nurse said gently. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect APGAR scores. You did good, Mama. Alara started crying then, ugly sobs she couldn't control, relief and exhaustion and hormones all crashing together. Damien leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt wetness on his face that wasn't hers. We have a son, he said, voice cracking. We have a son, Alara. I know. He's perfect. I know. I'm terrified. Me too. They brought Michael back 20 minutes later, wrapped in a blue blanket, a tiny hat covering his dark hair. The nurse showed them how to hold him, how to support his head, and then she left them alone. Damien sat in the chair beside Alara's bed, Michael cradled in his arms, and stared at his son like he was trying to memorize every detail. He has your nose, Alara said. He has your mouth. He's going to be handsome. He's going to be spoiled. I'm never saying no to this kid. Yes, you will. We agreed. No spoiling. I lied. Alara laughed, exhausted and sore, but happier than she'd been in years. Give him here. I want to try feeding him. Damien handed Michael over carefully, like he was made of glass, and watched as Alara struggled through the first attempt at breastfeeding. It was awkward and painful, and nothing like the book said it would be. But eventually Michael latched, and the relief on his face made everything worth it. We made this, Damien said quietly. This perfect, tiny human. How did we make something this good? Sheer luck, Alara said, and maybe a little bit of love. More than a little. She looked up at him, at the man who'd failed her and found her and was trying so damn hard to be better. Yeah, more than a little. That night, after the nurses finally kicked Damien out and made him go home for a few hours, Alara lay in the hospital bed with Michael asleep on her chest, feeling his tiny heartbeat against hers. She thought about the storm-lashed night 4 months ago when she'd stood at those gates, pregnant and alone, and convinced her marriage was over. Thought about the warehouse, the terror, the moment she'd been certain she was going to die. And she thought about now. About Damien coming back from the cafeteria with bad coffee and a stuffed elephant bigger than their son. About the way he looked at Michael like he'd been given a miracle he didn't deserve. About the future they were building, messy and imperfect in theirs. Your dad's an idiot, she whispered to Michael. But he's our idiot, and he's trying so hard to be good for you. Michael made a small sound, shifted against her, and went back to sleep. Alara closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt something that might actually be peace. The first night home from the hospital, Michael screamed for 4 hours straight. Alara tried everything: feeding, changing, rocking, singing lullabies her mother used to sing to her. Nothing worked. He just kept crying, red-faced and furious, and by 2 in the morning she was crying too. Damien took him from her arms. "Go sleep. I can't just... You had major surgery 3 days ago. You need rest." He was already walking toward the nursery, Michael wailing against his shoulder. "I got this." "You don't know what you're doing." "Neither do you. We'll figure it out together." Alara wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. She collapsed into bed and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She woke 4 hours later to silence. Panic spiked through her. Why wasn't Michael crying? Was he okay? Had something happened? And she stumbled out of bed, ignoring the pull of her incision. The nursery was dark except for a small lamp. Damien sat in the rocking chair with Michael against his chest, both of them asleep. His hand covered most of Michael's back, protective even unconscious, and the sight of them together made Alara's throat tight. She stood in the doorway watching until Michael stirred, making the small grunting sounds that meant he was waking up. Damien's eyes opened immediately, alert in a way that spoke to years of sleeping light in dangerous places. "Hey," he said quietly. "We didn't wake you, did we?" "No, I needed to check." "He's fine. Finally passed out around 3. Think it was gas." Alara moved into the room, sat on the ottoman near the rocker. "How'd you know?" "I didn't, just kept trying things until something worked." He looked down at Michael, whose eyes were open now, unfocused and searching. "Turns out he likes when I talk. Doesn't matter what I say, just the sound of my voice." "What did you talk about?" "Everything. My brother, my father, all the mistakes I've made and the ones I'm going to try not to repeat." Damien's hand moved in slow circles on Michael's back. "Promised him I'd be better than the men who came before me." "You will be." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Michael made a small sound, and Alara reached for him. Damien handed him over carefully, and she settled into feeding while Damien watched with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, you're good at this." "I'm terrified at this." "That's what makes you good. You care enough to be scared." After Michael fell back asleep, Alara returned to bed and found Damien already there, flat on his back staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Keep thinking about all the ways I could mess this up." "That's not helpful." "I know." She curled against his side, careful of her incision. "We're going to make mistakes, both of us. But as long as we keep trying, we'll be okay." "How are you so sure?" "Because I've seen you at your worst and you're still here, still fighting to be better. That's all any parent can do." He turned his head to look at her. "I love you. I don't say it enough." "You say it plenty." "I don't show it enough." "You're showing it now. 3 a.m. with a screaming baby, talking him through your trauma. That's love." Damien pulled her closer, and they lay there in the dark listening to Michael's soft breathing through the monitor until morning came. The first month was hell. Michael had colic. The pediatrician was sympathetic but useless, offering suggestions that didn't work and platitudes about it getting better. Alara spent most days in a fog of exhaustion, moving from feeding to changing to trying to sleep in 20-minute increments. Damien hired a night nurse, but Alara sent her away after 2 days because the woman kept suggesting formula, and Alara wasn't ready to admit defeat yet. So they suffered through it together, taking shifts, learning Michael's different cries and what they meant. The estate that had felt like a prison became a sanctuary. Damien worked from home more than the office, conducted meetings over video instead of in person, and turned down anything that required him to be gone overnight. "You're going to lose respect," Marco warned during one video call that Alara accidentally overheard. "People are already talking." "Let them talk." "This isn't sustainable. You need to show your face, remind people you're still in control." "I am in control. I'm just choosing what I control." There was a pause. Then Marco said, "You've changed." "Yeah, I have." After he hung up, Alara found Damien in the nursery, watching Michael sleep in his crib. "You don't have to give up everything for us," she said from the doorway. "I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing differently. People are going to see it as weakness. I don't care what people see. He turned to look at her. I care that when Michael's old enough to understand, he doesn't grow up thinking power matters more than family. What if they challenge you? Then I'll handle it. But I'm done living like my father did, paranoid, isolated, trusting no one, and destroying everyone who got too close. He crossed to her, took her hands. I'm building something different, for us, for him. Alara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that they could have this, the family, the peace, the life where Damien wasn't constantly looking over his shoulder. But she'd lived in his world long enough to know that walking away wasn't simple. Just promise me something, she said. Anything. If it comes down to choosing between the Empire and us, you choose us. Every time. No hesitation. I promise. The challenge came at 6 weeks. Alara was feeding Michael in the living room when Damien's phone rang. She watched his face change as he listened, watched the muscle in his jaw jump, and knew before he said anything that something was wrong. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up, looked at her. I have to go. What happened? Someone hit one of our warehouses. Took out 3 guards, stole $500,000 in product. Alara's blood went cold. Who? Don't know yet. But whoever it was, they're sending a message. He was already moving toward the door, checking the gun at his hip. I'll be back as soon as I can. Damien. He stopped, turned back. I have to handle this. If I don't, it'll look weak, and then we'll have 5 more families testing boundaries. I know. I'm sorry. Just come home safe. He crossed back to her, kissed her hard, kissed Michael's head, and then he was gone. Alara sat in the silence after, Michael heavy in her arms, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. He came back 4 hours later, uninjured but furious. Marco was with him, and they disappeared into Damien's office with the door closed. Raised voices carried through the walls, but Alara couldn't make out words. When Marco finally left, Damien emerged looking like he'd aged 5 years. What happened? Alara asked. It was the Kozlov family. Russians who think I've gotten soft, that they can push into my territory without consequences. He sat on the couch, dropped his head into his hands. I have to respond. If I don't, every 2-bit operation from here to Boston is going to think they can take shots at me. What does responding look like? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was flat. Violence. The kind that makes people remember why they were afraid of me in the first place. Alara's stomach turned. This was the cost. The price of the life he'd built. The empire he was trying to walk away from. You didn't just leave. Not without blood. Can Marco handle it? She asked. He could, but it won't have the same impact. They need to see me. Then go. The words hurt to say, but she meant them. Do what you have to do, but come home when you're done. Damien looked up at her, surprise and something else, maybe relief, in his eyes. You're okay with this? No, but I understand it. Just don't let it pull you back in. This is the last time, right? After this, you're done. After this, I'm done. He left at midnight. Alara stayed up, unable to sleep, Michael asleep against her chest, while she scrolled through news sites looking for reports of violence. Nothing for 2 hours. Then a breaking news alert about a fire at a warehouse in the industrial district. No casualties reported, but the building was a total loss. Her phone rang. Damien. I'm okay, he said before she could ask. It's done. What did you do? Sent a message. They'll think twice before trying again. Are you coming home? Yeah, give me an hour. He made it back in 45 minutes, smelling like smoke and gasoline. Alara met him at the door, and he pulled her into his arms without speaking. It's done, he said again, like he was trying to convince himself. It's over. But it wasn't over. 2 days later, Damien got a call from the Kozlov family's head. They wanted a meeting. Neutral ground, no weapons, just talk. It's a trap, Marco said immediately. Probably. But if I don't go, they'll see it as fear. So don't go, send someone else. That's not how this works. Alara listened to them argue from the doorway, Michael asleep in the carrier strapped to her chest. When there was a break in the conversation, she spoke up. Take the meeting. Both men turned to look at her. But I'm coming with you, she continued. Absolutely not, Damien said. You think they'll try something violent in front of a woman with a baby? I think they'll do whatever serves their interests. Then make sure it serves their interests to play nice. Alara shifted Michael's weight. You said you're done with violence. Prove it. Go in there and negotiate instead of shooting first. Damien looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. I'm your wife. That makes it my fight, too. He turned to Marco. What do you think? Marco was quiet for a moment. Then, she's right. They're less likely to pull something if she's there, and if they do, he shrugged. We'll be ready. The meeting was set for the next day at a restaurant downtown. Neutral territory, public enough to discourage violence, private enough for a real conversation. Alara dressed carefully. Nothing too expensive that would read as flaunting. Nothing too casual that would seem disrespectful. She settled on simple black, pearls at her throat, her hair pulled back. Professional. Unthreatening. A wife, not a player. Michael went in the carrier again because leaving him home felt wrong and bringing him sent its own message. This is my family. This is what you're threatening. Damien drove, silent and tense, one hand on her knee. Marco followed in a separate car with 2 additional security personnel, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to not seem aggressive. The restaurant was half empty, lunch rush not yet started. A man sat alone in a booth at the back, older, late 50s, with cold eyes and a face that had seen too much violence. Victor Kozlov. He stood when they approached, nodded once. Mr. Valente, and you brought your wife. How domestic. She insisted, Damien said evenly. This is Alara, and our son Michael. Victor's eyes flicked to the baby, expression unreadable. Congratulations. First child? Yes. Beautiful boy. Looks like his mother. The pleasantries were excruciating. They sat, ordered coffee, no one intended to drink, and then Victor got to the point. You burned down my warehouse. You stole from me first. A test, to see if you still had teeth. Victor leaned back. Turns out you do. That's good. Keeps things interesting. I'm not interested in interesting, Damien said. I'm interested in running my operations without interference. You want to operate in this city? We can discuss terms. But coming at me directly isn't going to end well for you. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Victor studied him, then shifted his attention to Alara. You must be very brave, Mrs. Valente. Or very foolish. Bringing a baby to a meeting like this. I'm neither, Alara said calmly. I'm just a mother who wants her son to grow up in a city that's not constantly at war. You have children, Mr. Kozlov. Something flickered in his expression. 3. All grown now. Then you understand. You know what it's like to want better for them than what you had. I do, but wanting something doesn't make it possible. No, but working toward it does. She leaned forward slightly, Michael stirring against her chest. My husband is trying to change how things are done here. Less violence, more business. If you're smart, you'll work with him instead of against him. Because the alternative, she paused. The alternative is more burned warehouses and dead soldiers. And for what? Pride? Victor's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You're wasted on him. Should have been the one running things. She is, Damien said quietly. She just lets me think I'm in charge. Victor laughed then, a genuine sound that changed his whole face. All right, I hear you. We can work together, but I want territory north of the river. The docks you've been sitting on without using. I'll give you access, not ownership. 60-40 split on profits. 70-30. 65-35, and I'll throw in security support for the first 6 months. Victor considered, then extended his hand. Deal. They shook, and just like that, the war was over before it really started. On the drive home, Damien was quiet, not upset, just processing. You're good at that, he said finally. At what? Negotiating, reading people, being the reasonable one in the room. Someone has to be. He glanced over at her, and there was pride in his expression. You should do it more. The negotiating. You're better at it than I am. I'm better at it because I don't have your reputation. People don't see me as a threat. Yet, I don't want to be a threat. I want to be a partner. You are. Then treat me like one. Include me in decisions. Let me help with the business side. You said you wanted to go legitimate. Let me help build that. Damien pulled into the estate gates, parked, but didn't get out. You really want that? To be involved? I really do. Okay. He turned to face her fully. Okay. We'll do it together. The next 6 months were a whirlwind. Alara discovered she had a talent for business that years of being a trophy wife had hidden. She took over the legitimate operations while Damien handled what was left of the criminal side, and between them they started shifting the empire's foundation. It wasn't fast. Some operations couldn't be legitimized, had to be sold or shut down. Some people refused to adapt, had to be cut loose. But slowly, painfully, they built something different. Michael grew, learned to smile, to laugh, to grab things with his tiny hands. Alara tracked every milestone in a journal Damien bought her, and he read it when he thought she wasn't looking. They attended therapy together, separately, working through the damage 3 years of a broken marriage had caused. It wasn't easy. Some sessions ended in fights, old resentments bubbling up, but they kept going, and slowly, Alara started to trust again. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough to believe that when Damien said he'd be home for dinner, he meant it. Enough to stop checking his phone for evidence of affairs. Enough to let herself hope this might actually work. The estate changed too. Alara hired new staff, people who didn't have ties to the old regime. She redecorated, made it feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Gardens that had been neglected for years were restored, and she spent afternoons in them with Michael, letting him feel grass and watch birds. Damien started teaching her the business, not just the legitimate side, but how the whole thing worked. Who the players were, what the alliances looked like, where the vulnerabilities existed. She learned fast, asked questions that made him think differently, and soon he was running major decisions past her before implementing them. You're good at this, he said one night after a particularly successful negotiation with a construction union. Really good. I had a good teacher. Bullshit. You're a natural. She smiled, pleased despite herself. Maybe I should have been a CEO instead of a housewife. You still can be. I'll step down, make you the head of the legitimate operations. You'd be better at it. You're not stepping down. We're partners, remember? Partners, he agreed, pulling her close. I like the sound of that. At Michael's first birthday party, Alara stood in the garden watching Damien play with their son and felt something she'd almost forgotten. Joy. Not complicated by fear or resentment or waiting for the other shoe to drop, just simple, clean happiness. Sophia approached, carrying a tray of cupcakes. He's good with him. He is. Never thought I'd see Damien Valente on his hands and knees making animal noises. Neither did I. Sophia set the tray down, brushed frosting off her hands. For what it's worth, I'm glad you gave him another chance. And I'm glad you gave me one too. Alara looked at her. Over the past year, Sophia had proven herself repeatedly. Smart, loyal, and genuinely remorseful for her part in the kidnapping. She'd become something close to a friend. We all deserve second chances, Alara said. The trick is not wasting them. I'm trying not to. I know, Michael squealed, and they both turned to watch Damien lift him high, spinning while Michael laughed with his whole body. He's going to spoil that kid rotten, Sophia said. I know, I've already accepted it. That night, after the party ended and Michael was asleep and the house was quiet, Damien found Alara in the nursery. She was standing by the crib, watching their son sleep like she still couldn't quite believe he was real. You okay? He asked softly. More than okay, She paused, searching for the right word. Happy. Actually genuinely happy. Damien came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. Me too. A year ago I thought we were over. Thought I'd be raising Michael alone. That you'd be some distant figure who sent child support checks and showed up for holidays. I would never have done that. I know, but I didn't know it then. She leaned back against him. You proved me wrong. About everything. I had to. Couldn't lose you twice. She turned in his arms, looked up at him. I forgive you. The words hung between them, huge and simple. Damien's hands tightened on her waist. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Not because you've earned it, but because I'm tired of carrying it around. The resentment, the anger, all of it. I forgive you for the miscarriage, for shutting me out, for making me feel invisible. All of it. His eyes were bright. Alara, and I forgive myself for staying when I should have left, for not speaking up sooner, for thinking I could fix you instead of just loving you as you were. You did fix me. No, you fixed yourself. I gave you a reason to try. Damien pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. I love you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that. I know, and I love you too, even when you drive me crazy. They stood there in the dim light of the nursery, holding each other while their son slept, and for the first time since the storm last night 18 months ago, everything felt right. Not perfect. Never perfect. But right. The final piece fell into place 3 months later. Damien came home early one afternoon, found Alara in the office working on quarterly reports, and dropped a folder on her desk. What's this? She asked. Paperwork. For the foundation. She opened it, scanned the documents. What foundation? The one we're starting. For families affected by violence, kids who lost parents to gang wars, women trying to escape dangerous situations. He sat on the edge of the desk. I've been thinking about what you said. About using our resources to help, instead of just taking. This is how we do that. Alara read through the proposal, her throat getting tighter with every page. Funding for counseling services, legal aid, safe housing, education programs, and job training. Everything they could do with the money Damien had made destroying lives, now redirected to rebuilding them. This is... She looked up at him, eyes stinging. This is incredible. It's not enough, won't undo the damage, but it's a start. What are you calling it? He smiled, small and sad. The Michael Foundation, after our son. So he grows up knowing his father tried to be better. Alara stood, moved into his arms. He's going to know, because you're going to be here to show him. I will, I promise. 6 months later, the Michael Foundation opened its doors. The press coverage was huge. Reformed crime boss turns philanthropist. Cynics said he was just laundering money. Believers said people could change. Alara didn't care what they said. She saw the families who came through, the women who finally had somewhere safe to go, the kids who got therapy, an education, and a chance at something better. That was what mattered. Damien stepped back from the empire entirely, turned day-to-day operations over to Marco and a board of advisors. He kept ownership, kept final say on major decisions, but he wasn't in the trenches anymore. Wasn't the first call when something went wrong. He was just a father, a husband, a man trying to make up for the damage he'd caused. On a Sunday morning 2 years after that storm last night, Alara woke to an empty bed. She found Damien in the kitchen, already dressed, making pancakes while Michael sat in his high chair babbling about dinosaurs. You're up early, she said. Couldn't sleep, too excited. About what? He grinned, looking younger than she'd seen him in years. It's a surprise. Get dressed. We're going somewhere. An hour later, they pulled up to a building downtown. Not fancy, not in the best neighborhood, but solid. The sign above the door read, New Beginnings Community Center. What is this? Alara asked. The Foundation's first standalone facility. Opened last month, but I wanted to wait until today to show you. He unbuckled Michael from his car seat, held him on his hip. Today's the 2-year anniversary of the night I almost lost you. Felt right to show you this now. Inside, the building was bright and clean, full of people. Kids in an art class, women in a job training workshop, a support group meeting in a side room. Everyone looked up when they entered, and a few people recognized Damien, came over to thank him. He was awkward about it, uncomfortable with gratitude, but he listened to their stories. A woman who'd left an abusive husband and was now managing a restaurant. A teenager who'd lost his father to gang violence and was about to start college. A single mother who'd gotten legal help and won custody of her kids. After they left, Damien was quiet in the car. Michael had fallen asleep in his seat, and Alara reached over to take Damien's hand. You okay? She asked. Yeah, just thinking about all the years I spent taking instead of giving. How different things could have been if I'd figured this out sooner. You can't change the past. I know, but I can change what comes next. You already are. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. For standing at those gates, pregnant and desperate and still believing I was worth saving. You were. You are. I don't know about that, but I'm trying to be. That night, after Michael was in bed and they were sitting in the living room with glasses of wine, Damien pulled out a small box. What's this? Alara asked. Open it. Inside was a ring. Not the massive diamond he'd given her when they got married, but something simpler. A band of platinum with a single stone, elegant and understated. I want to marry you again, Damien said. Not the spectacle we had the first time, with contracts and alliances and people who didn't care about us. Just us. Michael. The people who actually matter. Alara's vision blurred. We're already married. I know, but I want to do it right this time. Make promises I actually intend to keep. Start over properly. We can't start over, too much has happened. Then we'll start forward, build something new on top of the old foundation. He took her hand. Marry me, Alara. Again. For real this time. She should have said no. Should have told him they didn't need a ceremony to prove anything, that what they'd built over the past 2 years was enough. But looking at him, at this man who'd destroyed her and rebuilt himself piece by piece, who'd learned to choose family over power, who was trying so damn hard to be better, she couldn't say anything but yes. They got married on a Saturday in October, 2.5 years after the storm. No huge ceremony, just a judge at City Hall, Marco as witness, Sophia holding Michael, who kept trying to eat the rings. Alara wore a simple white dress, and Damien wore a suit that made him look like a stranger in the best way. The vows were different this time. Not the traditional script, but words they'd written themselves. Damien went first, his voice steady but his hands shaking. I promise to choose you, every day, every decision, every moment that matters. I promise to be the husband you deserved from the start, the father our son needs, and the partner you can trust. I promise that when I fail, because I will fail, I'll own it and do better. And I promise that I will love you with everything I am for as long as I'm alive. Alara's turn. I promise to be honest, even when it's hard, to call you on your bullshit, to support you when you need it, and to love you through all of it. I promise to believe in us, in this family we're building, and in the man you're becoming. And I promise that no matter what comes next, we'll face it together. They exchanged rings, kissed while Michael clapped, and walked out into October sunlight as new versions of themselves. The years that followed weren't perfect. They fought. About money, about parenting, about whether to have another baby. Damien still had nightmares sometimes, still struggled with wanting to solve problems with violence. Alara still had days where the resentment bubbled up, where she remembered standing at those gates and wanted to scream at him for making her beg. But they worked through it, went to therapy when needed, apologized when necessary, and chose each other even when it was hard. Michael grew into a happy, confident kid who loved dinosaurs and stories and following his father around the foundation asking questions. Alara got pregnant again when he was 4, a daughter they named Sarah, who had Damien's eyes and Alara's stubbornness. The foundation expanded. 3 more centers opened, then 5, then 10. They helped hundreds of families, employed dozens of people, and slowly changed the narrative around the Valente name. Damien never went back to the criminal world, sold off the last of those operations, cut ties with people who couldn't adapt, and built something legitimate that would outlast him. On their 5th anniversary of the second wedding, Alara woke to find Damien already awake, watching her in the early morning light. What? She asked, voice rough with sleep. Nothing. Just thank you. For what? For everything. For giving me a second chance, for believing I could change, for building this life with me. He reached out, brushed hair from her face. I know I don't say it enough, but I see you. Everything you do, everything you sacrifice, I see it, and I'm grateful. Alara's chest tightened in the good way. I love you too. Yeah? Yeah. Even when you wake me up before the sun's up to get sentimental. He laughed, pulled her close. Can't help it. You make me soft. You were always soft. You just didn't let anyone see it. I let you see it. eventually. They lay there as dawn broke, listening to their children still asleep down the hall, and Alara thought about the journey that had brought them here. The storm, the warehouse, the terror and pain and slow rebuilding of trust. It hadn't been easy. Hadn't been clean or smooth or anything like the fairy tales promised. But it had been real. And in the end, that was enough. Damien pressed a kiss to her forehead. What are you thinking about? How far we've come. It's been a hell of a ride. It has, but I wouldn't change it. Not even the bad parts? Alara considered. The bad parts made us who we are now, so no, I wouldn't change them. I'd hold on tighter during the hard moments, knowing we'd get through to the other side. We did get through. We did. And we'll get through whatever comes next. Together, Alara said. Always together. Down the hall, Michael's voice called out, asking for breakfast. Sarah started crying, probably wanting to be changed. The sounds of their life, messy, imperfect, beautiful. Damien groaned. I'll get them. We'll both get them. They climbed out of bed together, walked toward the noise and chaos of their children, and Alara realized this was it. This was the happy ending she'd stopped believing in. Not perfect, not tied up with a bow, but real and earned, and theirs. The storm last night felt like a lifetime ago. The woman who'd stood at those gates, broken and desperate, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or never failing. It was about showing up, day after day, choosing each other when it was hard, building something worth keeping. And as Alara lifted Sarah from her crib and watched Damien help Michael get dressed, she knew without question that they'd done exactly that. They'd built a life worth living, and they'd keep building it, together, for all the years to come.